Those are one of the things that I've really had to embody and learn in my time in Suffolk. And I sort of live by the quote where if you're going to quit, do it tomorrow. And you go back to that quote every single day.
Welcome to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership podcast, where we have authentic, wide-ranging conversations on leadership. Each conversation is a deep dive between external experts and Suffolk team members, and is designed to help our people build their leadership skills, think creatively, and redefine what's possible. This is Brigadier General Rebecca Halstead. General Halstead is the CEO of Steadfast Leadership and the first female graduate of West Point to be promoted to General Officer. We're also joined by Suffolk Vice President of Operational Excellence, Kelsey, and New York General Manager, Tom Giordano. Today, we're bringing you a conversation on Steadfast Leadership, based on the recent capstone session to our leadership retreat in Normandy, France. I'm Jay Tangney, your host for today's podcast. So Becky, if you could tell us about how athletics in high school helped you prepare for West Point and what came after West Point as an officer in the Army.
Well, sports played a big role. I think because I learned very early on I wanted to be an impact player. I wanted to be a valued member on the team. And the only way to do that is to show up and have a great deal of discipline. If my coach were still alive today, though, she would tell you that discipline is something she had to work really hard on me with, But it paid off because I think when I entered the Army and entered West Point, I had that very focused, disciplined mentality to show up, and be the best that I could be so the team could be a better team. And that played huge dividends over my career because everything in the military is about being the best that you can be so that the team benefits. Not so you benefit, but so the team benefits. And that's just the way it was for 31 years.
So can you talk about what you did on active duty in the Army?
Well, it was pretty varied. When I first started out, I started out in the nuclear weapons business. So everybody thought I was a little bit crazy because I chose that. But my assignment was Italy. So therefore, that was a good reason to choose nukes because it got me to Italy with a very nice country, very good food, and I'll leave it at that. But but the lifespan of someone in nukes is very short because very challenging. But I survived it, and then I went from there to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I did conventional ammunition. So I ran the largest ammunition supply point in the Northwest. The next 27 years really became supply chain management. I moved 18 times in 27 years. But what we do is we move around a lot in the military. We never do any job twice. So I think what it does is it allows us a real diverse portfolio for leading teams. And then as you rise up with responsibility, you really have to know how to pick your subject matter experts so that because you're not going to have a strength everywhere. And so I have to know what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are. So I'll look around the room and go, great, you have heavy experience. I need you, Tom. Great, you've done this. I need you. So to make me smarter as your leader. So, but we do have a lot of moving around, a lot of diversity in our jobs.
So 18 times in 27 years.
Yes.
And 4 deployed to Iraq.
Yes, and Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan. My memory is that you had responsibility for enormous numbers of people in both places, particularly Iraq.
Yes, and in Iraq, so I went from having a command in Germany to taking a command in Iraq. And in Iraq, we were part of a coalition force. So in Iraq, 20,000 military men and women, 5,000 civilian contractors, doing all the logistics in support of 250,000 men and women on the ground. So we operate out of 55 different bases. So the saying, a lot of people sometimes when they'll introduce me when I speak, they'll say, Amazon Prime of Iraq. And I kind of laugh because it is, except the address changes all the time. So very complicated.
And what exactly was your day-to-day responsibility when you were forward deployed to Iraq?
Well, first of all, you run 24-hour operations 7 days a week. I can remember some of my friends, I'd get an email from them on Friday night and they'd say, have a good weekend. And I would chuckle because there are no weekends in combat.
So it's just like Suffolk construction.
Yeah, very much.
Except
like
no
that.
one's shooting at you.
Very, very complicated, very challenging. And just when you think you have a plan, it kind of can go south very fast for many reasons. So an average 24-hour day, 80% of our operations at night. Every 12 hours, I received a 2-hour battle update. Where are the shortfalls? Where are the challenges? Are we going to meet target, not meet target for our missions? You know, and when I'm not doing those updates, I'm traveling the battlefield for the most part to see what my teams are doing and see how they're doing emotionally, physically, mentally. So, but most of the operations were run at night for good reason. You don't want to be putting 7,000 vehicles out on the road network and being too mixed in with the civilian folks. If you ate it, drank it, shot it, wore it, we were delivering it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to jump back a little bit, and then I want to get Kelsey and Tom involved here. I think I would be remiss not to talk about what it must have been like to be part of the second class of women at West Point. Really a trailblazer coming into that environment. I read the numbers, over 1,000 men in that class that you were in with 100 or so women. West Point and all the service academies clearly trying to figure out how to implement what I think was it President Ford's executive order to bring women into the academies. What was that like? I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult.
How do you spell hell? You know, it's really funny because, I mean, I have had a lot of years to think about this. When I got accepted to go to West Point in 1977, because I came from a small town with no traffic lights, it was a big deal. Everybody was really happy. I had never really heard from any of my teachers, any of my coaches, that you can't do something. Matter of fact, it was just the opposite. Go after what you want to go after. So my parents were very much like that. So I never really was not part of the team or told no till my first day at West Point. And then my first day at West Point, it was like, you know, I'm going to run you out of this man's army if it's the last thing I do. And, you know, you could feel the upperclassman's breath on your face, or a little bit of spit every once in a while. And you just go like, how long am I going to last, right? And then there's a decision point where you say, you know what, I'm going to go back to remembering what my parents told me. There are 2 rules to life. Rule number 1, don't quit. Rule number 2, refer back to rule number 1. And that was the way it was always, even with sports.
And you thought about quitting when you got there, right?
Oh, every single day. And I'm big on taking notes. And so if you look at every day in my note-taking at West Point, it'll say, I hate it here, I want to quit. But there was a moment when I realized that if I quit, they win. And so now I'm not saying that I thought that I was going to graduate every day, because I was pretty sure I wasn't going to. You know, academics were tough and all, but so you just learned to keep your thoughts to yourself. Don't say what you're thinking. You know, as President Bush used to say, inside words, because that would get you in trouble. So I learned a great deal of discipline, especially of my tongue, to not overreact and get in trouble. And I just felt like this was a real opportunity for me. And I didn't really think of it as men versus women until I got there. And so I just did the best I could, and I actually graduated on time. So, but quite honestly, still ran into those challenges even in the Army.
Yeah.
For the next couple of decades. But
gender-based challenges.
Yes, because, well, you know, women weren't allowed to be in combat roles either.
Right.
Yet we're in combat.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even when I retired, women were still not allowed to be in combat roles. And I had to scratch my head and go, well, wait a minute. I was jumping, I was in the same aircraft, the same convoys, the same bunker when we were being mortared as an infantryman. So I don't think the enemy really cares whether I'm infantry or not. They just want to get you. So I am very pleased to see that that's changed. Women die on the battlefield just as much as men, and then all the contributions that women have made. So I hope we're not going backwards.
Yeah, it's important we don't go backwards.
Yeah, it is.
For sure. So team, competition, progress, and gender, right? College athlete, Kelsey, in the minority still as a woman working in vertical construction. I think we're making progress there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
What's your reaction to Becky's comments about trying to impact change, both as a woman in construction who's been at Suffolk for a while now, right? As a college athlete who played on those teams. How do those 2 things apply at Suffolk Construction?
I sort of live by the quote where, you know, if you're going to quit, do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? And you use that, you go back to that quote every single day. And I think those are one of the things that I've really had to embody and learn in my time in Suffolk and being out in the field. I think there's certainly challenges when I entered the industry 10 years ago with being a woman. And I think one of the things you have to do is really use those opportunities to continue to grow and realize that you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And really reflect on that. And you mentioned, Becky, you take a lot of notes. I think that's an incredible aspect of a lot of really good leaders, is that they reflect on those experiences and they view them as growing opportunities. And they're constantly considering, what can I take away from this challenge and how can this make me a better leader ultimately?
It'll help you in the future. Sometimes we can't fix something today, but with the note taking and the not quitting, we can't make a difference in the future if we quit today.
Right.
So you kind of have to at least be thinking forward that, I'd love to quit today, but how am I ever going to be an impact player or make a difference, right? Change policies and those kinds of things. So,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a story in the case study, the Steadfast case study that you did with Harvard Business School and our friend Boris Groysberg. I want to just close out this topic with this story. You were at an Army event. I think you were in 06, which is a colonel, and there was a room full of men, your peer group, and there was a general about to enter the room. So the general staff officer, a major in the military,
right,
sets it up so that everyone's ready when the flag officer walks in the room. And it could be some form of standby,
right.
Attention on deck, whatever the case may be. Tell us what happened in that moment when that major prepared the room for the general to
Right.
walk in. And
Sure.
more importantly, what did you do afterwards?
Sure. So I was a colonel. I was a brigade commander, and the general was getting ready to walk into the room. And the normal command that the secretary of the general staff will do, and he is a major, he stands next to the door and he says, "Gentlemen, stand by." And then the next command is, "Gentlemen, the commanding general." And then, "Gentlemen, take your seats." By the third gentleman, I was like, you know what, I think I'll just stay standing. There were only two women in the room, the lawyer and myself, the SJA. But I quickly went through my mind and the steps, and I thought, well, if I stay standing, then everybody's gonna be like, "No, sit down, sit down." They're gonna wanna know why I'm still standing. So I thought, well, I could answer that because I'm not a gentleman. And he said, "Just gentlemen, take your seats." But I knew in that moment that if I do that, I'm the one who has the problem, not anybody else.
It becomes about you.
It becomes about me. So I just decided, no, just sit down. The reason why something that simple becomes frustrating is because by that time I have 20 years in the Army, and women are more prevalent, in the Army. And so you just would think that we could change the bad habit. So it's just, all it really is it's a bad habit, and we need to have some new good habits. So I knew the major very well, and great respect for him. So I decided the way to tackle this is when the meeting's over, I'll just go and I'll put my arm around Walt, and I say, "Walt, let's go have a chat." Now he's going to think I want to talk about going fishing or something like that, right? And I said, I want to reenact the beginning of the conference meeting today. And so he looked at me a little strange, and I said, "No, just go through your commands, what you said." So then he rolled his eyes and he shrugged his shoulders and he said, "Oh, ma'am." I said, wait. I think you're thinking, "Oh, ma'am, I didn't think you're one of those." Like there's something like that, a woman where that would upset me. And I said, "So let's just work with me. Go ahead and do it." And I said, "Here's the deal, Walt. If I were you and I stood next to the door and I said, 'Ladies, stand by,' the 98 men in the room would have a fit, let alone by the third time I said it." And I said, "You are a great officer. You're a great leader. And someday you're going to be there's no doubt in my mind, you will be a general someday. And you're going to have women on your team. And every time you do that, you're not being inclusive, but you're just saying that they're not as important. And you don't really feel that way, Walt. I know you don't, because I know how you treat me. I see how you treat your wife. You're not that way, but it can be perceived that way. And perception is huge as a leader. So I said, so just change the habit. Say people. Don't say anything. Just say stand by.
So you could have done nothing there, Becky,
I could
right?
have done nothing.
And then he doesn't learn.
I could have stood him at attention and pounded
Tuned him up.
I could have given him a tune-up, right? But instead, I just decided to put my arm around him and talk to him like a human being, And he just retired as a 3-star general. And he often, every time he sees me, he says, I could never thank you enough for correcting me that day. Because I could see he's the kind of leader that cares about everybody on his team.
Yeah.
But actions speak loudly.
I like that story because, we all see things like that, right? And you have a choice in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's tougher when it's you,
Right.
because you probably made the right choice not to stay standing.
Oh, no doubt.
You don't want to get court-martialed yourself,
Right.
especially with the staff judge advocate standing next to you. But you have to do something to correct it. You owe it to yourself, right? And you owe it to the next group of women who are going to be standing in that room.
And men.
And men. And you and him, the major,
yeah.
right? Because he's trying to do it in good faith.
Right.
And he's not seeing the unintended consequence of what he thinks is just doing his job. But you made that deliberate decision to go kind of resolve that in a coaching way, right? So I'm going to kick it to this guy, because this guy's one of our best coaches, right? So Tom runs New York, and I have folks on my team in New York, and the reputation that you have in New York is something very much in common with you, which is you know your people very, very deliberately. You know their families. You spend a lot of time caring about them and making sure that they're comfortable and able to do what we ask them to do at Suffolk, which, although isn't like the Army, that's the model that you espoused for years and years and years, right?
Right.
Getting to know people, getting to know their families,
Absolutely.
deeply caring about them. Why is that critical to leadership?
I think at the end of the day, we can kind of look at leadership, I think, in two ways. One, I think, is transactional, which I think is looking at the end in and of itself and achieving the end. And then I think a better way is a relational way, where we're looking at what are we doing in our every interaction that makes the whole better, finding the way that holistically engenders the success of the organization. And sometimes, and I think that what that means is to look at each person, figure out what their strengths are, figure out what maybe their deficits are, and try to work with them so that in the long run, you may lose a couple of battles on the way, but you're well on your way to winning the war. So I think that story is just terrific, by the way. And so I don't like to say there's any real difference between, something that's particularly masculine or particularly feminine in terms of traits, because I think that they kind of blend into each other in many ways. You can't. But what I will say is that there's a certain element of instinct and also an empathy that I think comes in the way you managed that situation and turned it into a way to make somebody better rather than to embarrass somebody.
Right.
So,
Well, if you think about it in reflection, right? I used to always say, well, I'm not going to work any harder because you're yelling at me, right? Or run any faster because you embarrassed me. So if I feel that way, then I know that the way I lead people, they're going to feel the same way. So I think I had to learn to take the time to figure out what's the best way to deal with this person, because we don't deal with everybody exactly the same way. We have to deal with them the way I think they'll be most receptive to the correction without feeling like you beat them up, So
Right, and a key piece of that is willingness to get to know your people.
Yes,
Right,
and-
willingness to spend time with them, invest the time in the relationship, to your point, Tom.
Yeah.
To be able to get to that place where you can really understand what's going to resonate with this person, and
Totally.
and how do I get them to view from my perspective, which is really getting them to a place where they can be empathetic. So
I think that's foundational, Kelsey, right? And I think we're all saying the same thing. To lead people through complex, difficult attack patterns with pressure, whether it's building a building or supplying 25,000 people in a combat zone, you sort of have to have that foundational belief in your people, right? So there's another story from your background that I read that I think is really relevant for this point, and that is you were about to forward deploy, and you were going through your advanced testing and certifications to forward deploy. And in order to forward deploy, and I don't think most people know this or think about this, but no matter what service you're in, you have to be certified to go with whatever your area of responsibility is, whether you're on a Navy ship. See how I snuck the Navy in there?
I saw that. Way to go.
Or with what you were doing. And you went to your reporting senior, and instead of getting the vote of confidence and the certification that you had been working very, very hard for with your people, you got the exact opposite.
Right.
Can you talk about that, Becky, and also why your commitment to your people helped you get through that time?
Right. Well, that was a very challenging time in my life. So I was a 1-star, he was a 3-star, and we do have to certify our people and our units. So I certified 2 units down. So then my colonels certified 2 units down, 2 levels down. So the 3-star had been out visiting, training, and certification. we in the Army pride ourselves in training to standard versus training to time. So although you might have a training event on the calendar for 3 hours, if you're done and everybody's completed the task at 2 hours, you don't just keep your people around to badger them. You go, great, you focused, you're trained, you're certified, go. Well, he visited one of my companies, which is brigade, battalion, company, 3 levels down. And when he visited the training, they were done. So they were packing up. And if you've ever seen soldiers pack up to go home and go on leave, it's like ants on an anthill, but they pack up a lot faster than they get ready. But so at any rate, so they were all packing up, and he looks at the calendar, the schedule, and says, no, they're supposed to be training till 11, it's 10:30, and he blows a gasket. And he calls me on the phone. And it is a one-sided conversation, and tells me to report to him in Heidelberg, which is a several-hour drive.
So he wanted to see you in person.
Wanted to see me in person. I'll give him credit for that, because I think these sort of things should be done in person. I didn't get to say a word edgewise. He just told me where he'd been, what he had seen, and what a failure I was. Hung up on me, so I get in my van to start driving towards Heidelberg. He calls me again just to give me some more opinion, and so I go in. And when I went in, usually generals don't report to generals, just saying. But I didn't take any chance. I knocked twice on the door, snappy salute, reported. He told me to take a seat. I did not take a seat till he took a seat. And then he got in the bottom drawer of his desk and he pulled out this huge yellow packet and he threw it on the table and he said, this is going to be you in Iraq, and you're going to fail just like this unit failed, and your people are going to die. And I was blown away. I have often described it as I couldn't feel my arms, I couldn't feel my legs, and I just wanted to puke on the desk. It was another one-sided conversation, and at the end of it, it was, you will recertify all of your companies, not just that one, all the companies. And so what that meant on a timeline in the military is that meant all those companies and the battalions and brigades that are certifying them will not take their leave. So, they had promised their spouses cruises and all kinds of things before going into combat for a year. That was off the table. He made it perfectly clear that he would give me no more resources, that we'd have to do it all out of hide. So a lot of it just wasn't making sense to me, because if I see that you're struggling, I'm going to do everything in my power, resource-wise and everything else, to help you succeed. And then if you don't, we'll have to figure that out. But instead it was really, we want you to fail. So to your comment about my team, so I went back to my headquarters in Kaiserslautern, or Wiesbaden, and I had to really think about, how do I communicate this to my team? Because right now I feel like a pretty big loser, even though I wasn't the captain in charge of that unit. We say, you're responsible for everything your unit does and fails to do. So I understand the burden of responsibility, and I kind of understand the tasks that we're going to recertify. I don't have a clue how we're going to get there out of our own assets. I can see the morale going down quite quickly without vacation time before going in. And what I decided to do is not pull everybody in my immediate team, because sometimes you have people in your immediate team that emotionally cannot handle the anger that's going on above us. And so I also know that my role is sometimes I have to be a buffer between my top leadership and my junior leadership. So for some, I was a buffer. For others, I opened the door and said, you need to know what's happening right now on the ground, and we got to figure this out together. I did have to kind of troop talk my way through, you're not a failure. Because the other thing that I often say is, if I don't deserve to lead men and women in combat, if I've shown you that I am inept and I am not competent, then you better not let me, you better fire me. But he couldn't fire me because that wasn't the case. But that's how the feeling I had. So it was quite a long process.
But you didn't take what he did to you and pass it down to your people.
No, not at all.
You did the exact opposite.
No, there was a group of 8 to 10 leaders that I had come to my office at 9 p.m. that night, because I needed to let them in on what was going on, because we have to have some understanding as to why. And I actually needed help with developing the plan. Yeah. How do we move forward and keep as many emotions out of this as possible? And at the end of the day, we all know, the more you train, the stronger you are. So we'll still benefit. We will still benefit from the toxicity, but it's going to be difficult. And I just knew I couldn't do that completely on my own. So, but yeah, no, I didn't call that young company commander and chew him out. And I didn't have the battalion commander, brigade commander report to me. Not at all, because I'd already been living that toxicity for a while. So I wasn't totally surprised, but unfortunate.
That's sort of the test though, right? I mean, it's great to be a great leader when it's a sunny day and everything's happy and everyone's going on leave.
Yeah.
The test is when something bad happens, and shocker, sometimes tough things happen on our operational sites or in our functional units or whatever the case may be. So as the person responsible for operations in one of our biggest regions where we're building literally skyscrapers on very small footprints, how do you react in New York when something goes wrong in your leadership style? To me, it seems really consistent with the way Becky responds.
Yeah, thanks. I think first of all, knock on wood, I think it's probably the thing that keeps me up most at night, is to make sure our people are able to go home every night to their families safely. I would say that I feel very comfortable in the way our company manages that risk in terms of making sure that everyone on site daily has observations, that they have to walk the site and look for things that are wrong or look for things that are right, and then tell the whole company about them, right?
Yeah.
They basically publish them to the whole company. And sometimes it's a sore spot with our people because it's a lot of work, right? It's every week you have several observations that you're responsible for that then need to be corrected and closed. But what we've seen is that creates a mentality where everyone is really aligned in terms of the mission, which is to make sure that we're able to do things, safely and effectively in that order, right? And we won't even get to the effectively if we're not safe. When something does happen, I think it's the same thing, right? That we make sure that we publish a report as to what's happened, and we'll have a safety stand down where we explain what was done, could have been done better, right? And so it's an event where we gather and we support one another, we talk about what happened, and then we say, let's come up with a plan forward so that it won't happen again, or that we've limited the ability for it to occur again. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that you talk about in your leadership is innovation. And that's something that you spend a lot of time on at Suffolk Construction with operational excellence and all the different things you're doing.
Absolutely.
So, Becky, can you give us an example of how innovation impacted your life in the Army and improved things for your troops as you went through? And then to give you a heads up, I'm going to ask you the same thing in terms of how you do it at Suffolk Construction.
Well, we do kind of pride ourselves that soldiers are the most innovative souls on the face of the earth. And I think that comes out of, and of course you went to Normandy and everything, I mean, that comes out of need, right? And so there's things that we need or things that we want that we're not gonna get from the big army. And, or you go into a country, I deployed into Afghanistan right after 9/11. There were no latrines, there were no showers, there were no, but I was the only woman in my tent, and so you have to become very innovative just on daily living, and so it's a way to find solutions without necessarily being given every resource that you would like. And I think that the thing that I love about innovation is that it allows people to be creative. It allows people to be more curious too, as to, is there another way we could do this? I'm a big believer in thinking differently. And that's what innovativeness is really all about. And then sometimes you end up getting it, cheaper and faster and all these other things. But identifying the need is pretty critical, or I say the requirement, because there's a lot of things that I would like that I don't necessarily need. We call them operational need statements, but what is the exact requirement? Is it just something I'd like to have, or is it something I really need to have?
Nice to have versus must have.
Yeah, exactly. So, and sometimes figuring that out is fun, but yeah.
So Kelsey, how do you think about innovation in what you do every day?
Yeah, I think innovation and discipline and consistency are actually intertwined in a lot of ways that people don't necessarily think about. I think in order to innovate on something, which is really the evolution, how am I going to take this to the next level? How am I going to find a creative solution or a new way of working? You have to have a baseline established, right? A consistent baseline. You have to be disciplined about an approach or way that you're doing things. I always tell teams, if you're going to look to change a process, you have to have a process to start with, right? And so consistency is really the foundation for innovation in a lot of ways. Tom mentioned this, but I think one of the characteristics of a lot of our really great leaders at Suffolk is adaptivity at the end of the day, right? Like the ability to take on challenges and to expect the unexpected in a lot of ways. You have to recognize that construction is a really difficult industry. You're coordinating people, materials, logistics, design decisions, all of these different things kind of come together in one single point in time on any given day, on any given basis. And all of those things coming together creates a high level of sophistication and complexity. And there are things that are going to go inevitably wrong, right? There's going to be challenges that you have along the way. And I think what really good leaders do is they expect that, and they have the discipline and the forward-thinking approach of knowing that those challenges are going to occur, and they are documenting and following the processes that lead up to that specific point in time. And so you think about contractual challenges that you might have on a job site, right? I think teams that do a really great job of dealing with those challenges, they've done all of the lead-up work to have the documentation in place, to have thought through what are all the challenges that I might encounter along the way. And then they're able to come up with those creative solutions because they've had that consistent execution leading up to that situation or point in time. So again, I think they're intertwined in a lot of ways that you don't necessarily think about, but I really think a consistent approach is foundational to evolving and making things better ultimately.
Yeah, and you touch on something that I think you two have in common, which is this organizational skill and discipline to take notes. And I know it sounds simple, but you're well known for your notebooks.
Yes.
and taking very careful, thoughtful notes. And there's a story in your background about how I think one of your direct reports couldn't recall something you had instructed him to do. And you went through your stack of notebooks and pulled out notebook number 7, page 144, and said, well, Major, I actually did tell you this. And you did it in a very polite way. And he said, yes, ma'am, and went about and did it. And look, we have a lot of information coming at us all the time, right? You doing your job, we all doing our jobs. And I think it's easy to be a little bit cavalier with managing that information. Talk about how you did that in the Army with so many people you're responsible for. How did you maintain that discipline to stay as organized as you did? And please talk about your notebooks.
Well, I mean, I had the notebooks to keep me organized, right? To follow up, to make sure I didn't miss something. So the notebooks were more to keep me on track, to be the best leader that I could be, versus a gotcha for the major.
Yeah.
But
it worked though.
And Kirk and I, we had such a great friendship and relationship. But he was like, "Ma'am, how do you remember all those things?" I said, "Because I write them down. I mean, I am not super smart. I don't have a photographic memory." And I said, and if you wrote it down, you'd be able to remember, so I wouldn't have to remind you. But I think it goes to Tom's comment. The other reason why I kept copious notes was because in the military, we have a process called the After Action Review, the AAR. And so if I want to be a valuable player during the AAR process, goes back to have a baseline process. So when we come to the meeting to do the AAR, if I've taken notes, because I'm not going to remember everything after an operation or event or a construction plan. So I'm very simple, plus and minus. Plus is, here's something we did well. Minus, here's something we didn't do well and we need to work on. And then LL was lessons learned. So you gave me way more credit for my notebooks than I probably deserve, but it's not like you could pick up one and they're steno pads, because I took shorthand back in high school, 70s. That's what women did, right? Anyhow, I have all those steno pads since I joined the Army and as an officer. And when I pick those up and I can look down the margin, I can see LL, I know it's lesson learned. I can see TP, that means turning point, something happened. I can see Tom's name or your name, and I go, I need to follow up with you. And it just kept me going forward. And then the back of my notebook, and this is in the Harvard business case study, it shows kind of examples, but in the back of the notebook, I used to kind of ponder, well, maybe someday I'll get promoted and I'll have your job, right? And so in the back of my notes, and our ranks are by numbers. So when you're a major, you're an 04. when you're going to become a lieutenant colonel, you're an 05. So if I was a major, in the back of my notebook were 05 notes. Because a great mentor of mine once said, don't be too lofty in your thoughts of success. You know, think 2 jobs out, 1 promotion up, 2 jobs out, 1 promotion up. So the back of my notes would be, you know, 03, 04, 05, 06. I never really had 07, which is general, because I felt like that was, you know, that wasn't going to be within reach. So I tended not to have 07 notes, but
Worked out for you though.
it worked out. It worked out okay. But you know, you couldn't pick up my notebook and go, wow, this is juicy, or this is, you know, a lot of abbreviations. But it also helps me now because, you know, now in speaking on leadership, you know, and my memory isn't as good as it used to be. If you want to know, well, what was it like to be in Colombia, you know, sitting in the room with President Uribe, who's got a civil war going on, and I was the executive assistant to a 4-star. Well, can you talk about some of those meetings? I could pull that steno pad out and pull that out and look at the notes and have a good idea of some of the main topics we were talking about, some of the things we needed to follow up with folks like Secretary Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
He was just a big R in my notes, you know?
Yeah.
So it's valuable now for kind of capturing stories to continue to talk about leadership lessons learned.
I had a mentor once say, doesn't matter what the system is, but you need a system.
You need a system.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Comes back to.
It's such a great lesson. I mean, you have this incremental set of rules that you're creating and observations that really refine your ability as a leader year after year, year upon year. You can draw upon it. You can look at it as kind of a guide.
Right.
And it's so effective, right? It's that constant sort of thoughtfulness and small improvements that get you there. And I think, you know, with what Kelsey does with our business, it's the same thing, right? We have this manner that we can export throughout the business that lets us, you know, understand where we are in terms of metrics, learn from them, you know, speak a language that's consistent throughout the business and improve.
Keeps you grounded too, right? Because you go back and you go, and that's what I liked about the notes, because I love to fish. But I don't like to fish with people who catch a fish this big and they tell everybody it was this big, right? So I think it keeps you grounded. It keeps it realistic. You know, you don't sensationalize your stories. You can go back and really kind of revisit what ground truth was and what you learned from it.
Right, and there's this thread of continuous improvement in a lot of
Absolutely,
leadership lessons.
I totally agree, and sort of like measuring results, right, based on the data, and also authenticity, because words matter, right? And it seems like more and more in the world these days, you could be in a meeting with me and not write down what I say, and then I come out and say I said X, and you wrote down that I said Y.
Right.
Right. I think
Right.
the discipline of taking careful notes mitigates that.
Well, another good story along that lines, though, which I think is important to put it in perspective, is so I would travel with this 4-star all over South America. I was his executive assistant. So we were always in the room with the presidents of the country, the ambassadors, right? So the ambassador in every country also has a colonel. So I was the 4-star's colonel. And we go into the meetings, and I would take the notes from my boss, because he's not taking notes while he's listening and everything else. When we get on the plane, I type up all the notes of what was discussed in the meetings to send a cable to who? The SecDef. Well, the colonel for the ambassador does the same thing, to write a cable for who? Secretary of State. We get to read both. And so sometimes we'd read both, and my boss, his name was General Hill, he said, Halstead, were we in the same meeting as the others? But the reason why is because the perspective was different. The colonel in, you name a country in South America, working every single day with the leaders that are in that room, you know, and all of them were men, theirs read like, especially the one in Colombia, his would read like, the Secretary of Defense is in a bad mood today. And, you know, he put all this emotion and other things into the writing. It read a lot nicer, you know, as far as like a story, where mine was just factually what was said. And so the challenge was the response that the Secretary of State would have versus Secretary of Defense would be quite different. And so it was a good observation for myself to go, I need to make sure that when I'm communicating that I'm not arousing emotion that maybe wasn't there. Yeah. That might just be my perception.
So one thing that comes across from your career primarily in the comments of others, your contemporaries, your seniors, and importantly, the juniors, the people who reported to you for a very long time. They all consistently talk about how positive you are with your attitude, even in the bad moments, even in the tough times, and how that impacted them, whether you're in Afghanistan or Iraq or just in life, because you know their kids' names and you know their wives' names. And in the tough moments, you always seem to lift people up with your own positivity. Can you talk about that and how you got there and why you believe in that?
Well, I don't know how I got there, but I think it goes to one thing that Tom said earlier about relationships. And I've always enjoyed pouring myself into relationships with people, whether it was inside my family or outside my family. And I was raised in a very positive home. I was disciplined. You knew the rules, but there was always gratitude, there was always reward, and there was consequences when you didn't do the things you're supposed to do. So, but I think my grandfather always said, there's silver lining in every cloud. And my grandmother used to say, don't pray for the storm to go away, pray to get through the storm. And so I think especially as I experienced West Point, as I mentioned earlier, I never ran faster, I never worked harder if somebody was yelling or screaming at me. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. If someone who really believed in me and believed in my potential put their arm around me and said, kind of disappointed in your performance today, that would take me to my knees, right? And so I think I was blessed with a fairly good sense of humor, which you have to have something if you don't get height, right? So at 5'1.5", you have to have some humor about the problems in front of you, right? The challenges in front of you. And I just have always felt like everybody gets more out of it if you can take a positive approach, because anger usually and negativity spreads twice as fast as positivity. And it makes you ill too, candidly.
Yeah.
So,
it's contagious.
It
on
is.
both sides.
On both sides. And being positive is very contagious. And as far as knowing my families and knowing their children, to me, that's because when I look at a person come in the room, I envision hundreds, if not thousands of other people behind them, people they've worked with, their family, whatever. That's the makeup of that person. And I want to get to know them through all that. So I enjoy life.
Yeah, important. Kelsey, what do you think about the power of positivity in your world at Suffolk?
Look, I think your attitude is one of the few things that you have complete control over every day, right? And Becky, you mentioned this in your case study as well. When you see the good in people and you really believe that, everyone wants to wake up every day and do a good job.
Right.
They do. And if you really believe that in your heart, then you know that it's up to you as a leader to bring out the best in those people and to know that there is an achievable good outcome that can come from coaching and mentoring and finding that within other people. And so I think a lot of that comes back to that attitude. If you have a positive attitude, if you believe that, you can get people there. So I think that's a piece of it. I think another piece of it is just when it comes back to the mission. If you get to a place where morale is low and you're negative and you don't believe that you can achieve whatever you're after, then you're never going to get there, right? That negative attitude and that lack of optimism takes focus away from the objective. And I think what good leaders do is they step up in times when there's high pressure situations, when there's high stakes, and they take initiative and they do that with a level of positivity and optimism that gets people excited about following them. That creates a level of energy that people want to be around. And so I go back to that piece you can control, and you might be met with challenges, but if you can have a positive attitude around them and you can ignite excitement amongst a group of people, you can still achieve the mission and the objective, maybe in a different way than you initially imagined.
She mentioned energy, and I thought about, I have another saying, does your face say yes? And the kind of the joy of this group right here was I keep watching all of you, like, your face says yes, your face says yes, but have you worked around people whose faces don't say yes?
Yes.
It's really hard to get energy and positivity. They can say it all day long, but if their face doesn't say that.
Body language.
Right. So sometimes, you have to say, go look in the mirror. Tell me if your face says yes, Yeah, so you made me think of that, but that.
I like
points.
that one.
What do you think, Tom?
Oh, it's a great point. My father, he didn't achieve quite as much as you did in the military. General, he was a captain in the Navy for 35 years, but he used to always tell me that, Tom, it's not the aptitude, but the attitude
Yeah.
that determines the altitude.
Altitude, yeah.
Certainly a truism, hard to dispute, but I do think there is that other side of it where we are challenged at times where even if we don't surround ourselves with negativity, we hold ourselves to high account, right? And I think that's the time where you also need to rely on others as a leader to sort of ground you and kind of put things in perspective as to where you were and where you are and where you still plan on going. And all of that is about kind of finding the way to keep that positivity and that kind of move forward and don't quit being rule number one, and of course, never losing sight of rule number two.
Right.
So
It's hard, right? Sometimes it's hard to stay positive and
Oh, it is hard.
keep that attitude up in the tough moments. But shifting gears a little bit here, one of the things you talk about in your Harvard case study and in your book is selfless service and service for others. Can you talk about your evolution in terms of those words after 27 years on active duty and where you are in your life now?
Absolutely. I think it changed over time, to be honest with you. And I say that because my perception was always for selfless service is that I put the team first or put families first or whatever. That in every action or every decision I'm making, I need to run it through this filter or this lens of, am I doing this for me or I'm doing this for the betterment of the team? And I always hope it's for the betterment of the team. But when we came through a time in the Army when lieutenants and captains were leaving left and right and retention was really horrible, we were asked by our leadership to interview all those people as they left. Why are they leaving? And oh, by the way, if they left, they might have been your top lieutenant. We were told, don't give them a top performance report.
Because they're leaving.
Because they're leaving. So I had no issue with interviewing each one of them because I always did that anyhow. If you left my organization, I wanted to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly so that I could be a better leader. But what I did tell the leadership is I really think we ought to be interviewing the ones who are staying and asking them why they continue to serve. But what I kind of learned at the Army at the bigger level was selfless service meant you stay. And that's not what it meant to me. Because selfless service might mean, because I had a lot of men who worked for me, mostly men, that loved what they did, but maybe they had a handicapped child. Maybe they had a wife who really hated that they were in the military. And they were juggling, what do they do first personally versus professionally? And my opinion was, I don't know all the facts, so whatever decision you make, I'm going to presume you're making the best decision for you and your family. And wish you would stay, but if you don't, so don't consider that not being selfless. And if they were a top top performer, I still gave them the top performance because they're going to go out and interview for other jobs and they earned it. And so I did think we started to bastardize the term a little bit in the military. But for me personally, I think it really is, what do I do every day to try to benefit others before myself? But I better be looking at it really closely because you can slip.
Yeah. Kelsey?
You know, I think what I observe at Suffolk every day is we have a really competitive culture, right? We have a bunch of people that want to be winners. We want to build these amazing projects. We want to hit the schedule. We want to deliver an incredible experience for our clients. And we have a lot of personalities that are a part of that. And I think the thing that really exceptional leaders do is they balance selflessness with competition. And what they recognize is that there's enough success to go around for everyone at the end of the day, right? They have an abundance mindset, and they really believe that if we win as a team and that if we achieve the goals, there will be enough recognition to go around for everyone. And I think that's what really sets apart some of the people that are individual contributors versus people that are able to achieve much more as a team is, the whole is really greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And I think that balance and that sweet spot is key.
Yeah.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Selfless service, Tom?
Yeah, completely agree. I think, look, there's a little bit of a dichotomy, right? You when you compete, you want to put points on the board. You want to win. But I think there's a time where you start getting to that arc of realizing that really winning is more about making the people around you the best that they can be. And if you can leverage the best of what the people around you are it's so much more impactful than you putting your points on the board, you know? And you look at Michael Jordan, right?
Yeah.
You saw him make that arc. You saw at the end of his career, everyone who he surrounded himself with, even though he was a guy who, you know, he certainly was a stable leader on that team, you could see him finding the roles for the people around him to make them better. And so at some point, you know, you say you're a leader, but you're really a servant. You know, it's kind of that
Absolutely.
leader as service, which I think is
Service for others, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
I've learned a ton from all three of you today. Thank you for being here. It was an honor to talk about it with you, General, and with my colleagues here. You've been listening to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another leadership conversation. Thanks for listening.